Now, I've sent you a set of questions. I want to discuss those questions. The first question is, diphthongs with a central off glide are called centering diphthongs, and diphthongs with a front off glide are called fronting diphthongs, and diphthongs with a back off glide are called diphthongs. What are the diphthongs with a back of glide called? So they are known as restrictive. Retracting diphthongs. So I want you to explain what is this thing? Glide, a central off glide, a centering diphthong, and how centering diphthong is associated with central off glide. The same with front off glide and back off glide. What do these terms really mean? Fronting diphthongs and retracting diphthongs. And then I also want you to give me examples, real world examples, like what's the mechanism that underlies these these processes. So I want you to explain everything in detail of what it is, what are the examples, how does this function, everything.
Sure, let's break it down. A diphthong is a complex vowel sound that begins with one vowel and glides into another within the same syllable. The key here is the glide, which refers to the smooth transition from the starting vowel, the on glide, to the ending vowel, the off glide. Central off glide and centering diphthongs. A centering diphthong is a diphthong that ends with a glide towards a central vowel, such as schwa. The central off glide refers to this movement towards the central vowel. In English, an example of this is the vowel sound in the word bear, bear, where the vowel glides from a to a. Fronting diphthongs and front off glide. A fronting diphthong involves a glide towards a front vowel, such as I or a. The front off glide is the movement towards this front vowel. A common example is the sound in, say, where the vowel glides from I to e. Retracting diphthongs and back off glide. A retracting diphthong involves a glide towards a back vowel, such as or o. The back off glide is the movement towards this back vowel. An example is the vowel sound in go, where the glide moves from o to o. How these work. The underlying mechanism for these diphthongs involves shifting the position of the tongue. For centering diphthongs, the tongue moves towards a more central position in the mouth. For fronting diphthongs, the tongue moves towards the front of the mouth, while for retracting diphthongs, the tongue moves towards the back. These transitions create the characteristic diphthong sound by smoothly combining two vowel positions. So, for example, in a word like bear, bea, the tongue starts in a mid-open position and moves to a more centralized, relaxed position, producing the diphthong. Does that help clarify these terms and how diphthongs work?
Yes, it certainly did. Moving on, electrochemography. So, first option involves the application of the electrodes to observe and record the muscular contractions in the vocal tract during speech, or involves the use of face mask, which can differentiate oral and nasal airflow during speech and can measure air volume and velocity and record it visually. Next, displays a three-dimensional visual record of an utterance in which time, frequency, and intensity are displayed. Next, involves the use of artificial palate containing electrodes which register the tongue and palate contacts as they are made. So, the correct answer is it involves the use of face mask. It involves the use of face mask, which can differentiate oral and nasal airflow during speech and can measure the air volume and the velocity and can record it visually. So that's electrochemography. It can differentiate between the oral and the nasal sounds during speech, and it can measure air volume and velocity, So it can differentiate between the oral sound versus the nasal sound. It can measure the air volume and velocity. So what is the volume of the air needed to produce a sound versus the velocity with which a sound is uttered or produced. The velocity with which the air flows in order to produce a sound. These are measured by the electrochem. So, what I want you to do is, I want you to briefly elaborate on what electrochem really means. A simple explanation followed by a complex explanation.
Electrochemography is a technique used in speech research to measure and visualize airflow during speech. It specifically differentiates between airflow through the oral and nasal cavities, allowing for detailed analysis of how air moves during speech production. For a more complex explanation, electrochemography typically involves a face mask equipped with sensors that measure the volume and velocity of air as it passes through the mouth and nose. By analyzing these measurements, researchers can observe patterns related to oral and nasal airflow, which is crucial for understanding how certain speech sounds are produced. This technique is particularly useful for studying speech disorders or understanding the aerodynamic aspects of speech, such as how different articulations affect airflow and how airflow might vary in conditions like nasal congestion or cleft palate. Would you like to dive into the technical aspects of how these measurements are captured and analyzed further?
Yes, I want you to elaborate a scene wherein electrochem of a patient is being undertaken under the guidance of supervisors, and then what they really are doing is that they are measuring the air volume and velocity and the difference between the oral and the nasal sounds using electrochem. Now, I want you to elaborate how that scene really looks like. What specific steps are being taken, and what are the participants doing? How many participants are there? So everything like a movie, explaining a director explaining a scene.
Imagine a research lab dedicated to speech studies. The room is softly lit with advanced equipment set up around a central space. A patient who might be there for speech therapy or part of a research study sits comfortably in a chair. Around them, there are at least 3 to 4 people. A lead supervisor, 1 or 2 graduate students assisting with the procedure, and possibly a speech therapist or clinician overseeing the patient's condition. The key piece of equipment in this scene is an electrochemograph machine. It's a sophisticated device with a monitor displaying real-time data connected to a face mask designed for the patient. This face mask has embedded sensors that measure the airflow through the mouth and nose. The patient, wearing the mask, sits still as they prepare for the recording. The lead supervisor might be standing beside the machine, explaining the procedure to both the patient. They say, gesturing to the monitor. This will help us understand the relationship between the air coming from your mouth versus your nose and how it affects your speech. 1 graduate student positions the face mask securely on the patient, ensuring it's comfortable but snug enough to capture accurate data. Another student monitors the equipment, making sure the sensors are properly calibrated. They are likely double-checking the settings on the electrochemograph to ensure it's ready to measure both the volume and velocity of air during speech. The scene unfolds methodically. The patient is asked to produce a series of sounds, ranging from simple vowels like ah to more complex nasal sounds like mm. As the patient speaks, data streams across the monitor, showing spikes and patterns in airflow. The monitor displays 2 different channels, one for oral airflow and one for nasal airflow. The differences in these airflow paths help the researchers distinguish between sounds that primarily use the mouth versus those that use the nose, like nasal consonants. The graduate students are busy observing the patterns, taking notes, and occasionally adjusting the equipment as needed. The lead supervisor might ask the patient to repeat specific sounds to get more precise measurements. They could say, "Could you repeat the word man one more time, please?" We're looking at how the airflow transitions between the nasal and oral cavities. As the experiment progresses, the team carefully analyzes the patterns on the screen. They might discuss among themselves using jargon like nasal airflow velocity or oral air volume. They could be comparing this patient's data to a baseline or referencing a study. Occasionally, they may pause to check in with the patient, making sure they're comfortable and not fatigued. After the sounds are recorded, the team reviews the data together. On the screen, they see detailed graphs showing peaks and valleys, representing the different airflow volumes and velocities during speech. The lead supervisor points out interesting observations, like how certain sounds result in higher nasal airflow, or how others barely engage the nasal cavity at all. The scene wraps up with the researchers thanking the patient for their time and beginning to discuss the next steps, which could involve further analysis or preparing a report on the findings. The lab gradually quiets as the team begins their post-experiment routine, discussing what the data means for their broader research goals, all while the complex visualizations of the electrochemography process continue to be the focal point of their study.
All right, the next question is, in structural phonology, a set of techniques which can be automatically or mechanically applied to a sample of language and which will produce a correct grammatical analysis. So, in structural phonology, a set of techniques which can be automatically or mechanically applied to a sample of language and will produce a correct grammatical analysis is called discovery procedures. Now, please explain what structural phonology is, what discovery procedure is, what are the set of techniques that can be applied automatically or mechanically. Um, in simple terms,
Structural phonology is a branch of linguistic theory that studies the organization of sounds in a particular language, focusing on how phonemes, the smallest units of sound, are systematically structured within a language. It's rooted in structuralism, which views language as a system where every element gains its meaning in relation to others. In structural phonology, the emphasis is on analyzing the relationships between sounds rather than their individual articulatory or acoustic characteristics. Now, within this framework, discovery procedures are a set of techniques or methods designed to uncover the structure of a language systematically. These techniques can be applied to a language sample to yield an accurate grammatical analysis. The goal of discovery procedures is to identify and describe the phonemic inventory, the set of phonemes of a language, and the rules governing their distribution, without requiring prior knowledge of that language. This approach contrasts with intuition-based methods as it aims to be objective and replicable. The techniques used in discovery procedures are based on the assumption that language patterns can be revealed through a mechanical or algorithmic approach. Here are some of the key methods used. 1. Minimal pairs. One of the primary techniques is identifying minimal pairs, words that differ by only one phoneme and have different meanings, e.g., bat versus pat. By analyzing minimal pairs, linguists can determine which sounds are phonemes in the language. 2. Phonemic distribution. Another technique involves examining the distribution of sounds within a language. This includes looking at which sounds occur in which contexts, e.g., at the beginning or end of words, between vowels, etc. To determine which are allophones, variations of the same phoneme, and which are distinct phonemes. Contrast and complementary distribution. This method involves identifying whether two sounds are in contrastive distribution, i.e., they appear in the same context and change meaning, or complementary distribution, i.e., they never appear in the same context, suggesting they are allophones of the same phoneme. 4. Commutation tests. A commutation test involves substituting one sound for another in the same linguistic environment to see if it creates a new word with a different meaning. This test helps in determining the phonemic structure. These techniques are considered mechanical because they are applied systematically to data, and theoretically, any linguist following the procedures should arrive at the same analysis. The goal of structural phonology and discovery procedures is to develop a scientifically rigorous approach to analyzing languages, which can be particularly useful for studying languages without extensive written records or established grammatical descriptions.
All right, move on to the next question. The next question, in generative phonology, the question concerning how far removed from surface structure the underlying form should be is about. So, in generative phonology, the question concerning how far removed from the surface structure the underlying form should be is about positing abstract segments. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to create some kind of hypothetical, movie.
It seems like you want a deeper exploration of how abstract segments and underlying forms relate to surface structures in generative phonology. Let's dive into that. In generative phonology, the underlying form is the abstract mental representation of a word or morpheme, while the surface structure is the final spoken form that results after all phonological rules have been applied. The question of how different these two forms should be relates to the concept of abstract segments. Abstract segments are theoretical constructs that help linguists understand how sounds are represented in the mind, beyond their actual pronunciation. They are not necessarily the same as the sounds we hear, but are meant to capture underlying patterns and rules that produce the observable variations. Imagine a language where a certain sound undergoes a predictable change depending on its context. For example, in English, the plural morpheme is pronounced as z or is, depending on the final sound of the noun it attaches to. The underlying form in this case is abstract and could be represented as a single abstract segment, like plural, while the surface forms are the actual pronunciations s, z, and. In generative phonology, how abstract these underlying forms should be is debated. Should the underlying form be close to the surface structure, minimal abstraction, or should it be more abstract to capture deeper, more complex patterns, maximal abstraction? For instance, consider a language where a vowel changes its quality in different contexts. If the abstract underlying form is represented as a specific vowel that changes based on surrounding sounds, then the phonological rules that apply to this underlying form determine the various surface forms. The question becomes, how much do these abstract forms need to reflect the actual pronunciation or surface structure? This involves balancing between simplicity and accuracy in representing the mental phonological system. In summary, in generative phonology, the debate about positing abstract segments addresses how far removed the mental, abstract representations, underlying forms, should be from the actual spoken forms, surface structures. The goal is to find the most efficient and accurate way to model the phonological system of a language.
Now, can you create an imaginary movie scene in the same context? Positing the abstract segments, and there are characters. So name those characters and create a movie scene like and explain that scene to me every nitty gritty in detail.
Imagine a movie scene set in a bustling linguistic research lab. The film is titled The Sound of Structure. The lab is filled with advanced technology and various linguists working on different projects. Here's the detailed scene, titled The Sound of Structure. Scene, the abstract arena. Characters: 1. Dr. Emily Carter, the lead phonologist, known for her expertise in generative phonology. 2. Professor Alex Bennett, a skeptical yet brilliant linguist focused on phonological theory. 3. Dr. Mia Patel, a young, enthusiastic researcher working on phonological data collection. 4. James Liu, the lab's tech expert handling the high-tech phonological analysis equipment. Setting: the lab is high-tech, with large screens displaying phonetic symbols and abstract diagrams. There's a central conference table surrounded by computers and recording equipment. A large whiteboard is filled with phonological rules and representations. Action: 1. Dr. Emily Carter is standing by the whiteboard, excitedly discussing her latest findings. She's explaining how abstract segments are crucial in understanding the underlying forms of different languages. 2. Professor Alex Bennett walks in, looking skeptical. He's holding a stack of phonological data sheets. He places them on the table and starts a heated discussion about the practical implications of positing abstract segments. 3. Dr. Mia Patel is seated at a computer, analyzing data. She's examining recordings of vowel shifts in various contexts. On her screen, abstract representations of vowels are shown changing form based on surrounding sounds. 4. James Liu is adjusting a sophisticated phonological analysis machine. The machine displays real-time visualizations of sound changes in surface forms, showing the transition from abstract segments to actual pronunciations. Dialogue and actions. Look at this data. If we posit an abstract segment for the vowel in question, we can predict how it will transform in different environments. It's like uncovering the hidden blueprint of the language. But isn't this abstraction a bit too far removed from actual speech? How do we justify such complex underlying forms when the surface forms are often simpler? I've got an example right here. Watch this. She manipulates the data on her screen, showing how the vowel A, in different contexts, can be represented as the abstract segment A. The machine visualizes this with different vowel pronunciations appearing on the screen. The real-time data is matching our predictions. This abstract segment model seems to align well with our surface observations. Exactly. The abstract segment helps us understand the deeper rules governing vowel shifts. It's not just about the surface forms, but how these forms emerge from more abstract representations. I see your point. It's fascinating to see how these abstract forms can simplify and unify our understanding of phonological patterns. Maybe there's merit to this approach after all. Scene end. The scene concludes with the team collaboratively working on refining their model. The camera pans out, showing the lab filled with energy and discussion, capturing the excitement and complexity of uncovering the abstract structures underlying spoken language. This scene encapsulates the process of positing abstract segments in generative phonology, highlighting the debate and discovery involved.
All right, two assertions. First, derivational suffixes precede the inflectional suffixes in words in Indian languages. The second, conjugation is used primarily for nouns and declension is used primarily for verbs. So, conjugation for nouns, declension for verbs. Second is not correct. The first assertion, I don't know. One is okay, that's correct. Derivational suffixes do precede the inflectional suffixes in words in Indian languages. Now, please explain the first assertion along with an example demonstrating this phenomena from the Indian languages.
first assertion, that derivational suffixes precede inflectional suffixes in words in Indian languages, refers to the order in which morphemes, the smallest units of meaning, are attached to a root word. In linguistics, derivational suffixes are used to create new words by altering the meaning or grammatical category of the root word, whereas inflectional suffixes are used to modify a word to fit a specific grammatical context, such as tense, number, or case. In Indian languages, this order is common. First, a derivational suffix is added to the root word to create a new word or change the part of speech. Then, an inflectional suffix is added to express grammatical relations such as case, gender, or number. Example, Hindi language. Let's take the Hindi word lick, which means to write. 1. Derivational suffix. The suffix I, can be added to lick to form the noun likhai, which means writing as a noun. Here, the derivational suffix a changes the verb lick into a noun. 2. Inflectional suffix. After adding the derivational suffix ai, you can add an inflectional suffix to indicate number. For example, likayo adds the plural inflection yon, which changes the word to writings in the plural form. So the word evolves as follows. Root, lick, to write, with derivational suffix likai, writing, with inflectional suffix likayo, writings. This demonstrates that derivational suffixes come first, creating a new base, followed by inflectional suffixes, which then modify that base for grammatical purposes. This pattern is consistent across many Indian languages, including Hindi, Tamil, Bengali, and others.
So it is also seen in Tamil as well.
Yes, absolutely. Tamil, another Dravidian language, follows a similar pattern where derivational suffixes precede inflectional suffixes. Example, Tamil language. Let's take the Tamil verb root padu, which means to sing. 1. Derivational suffix. By adding the derivational suffix pihu, the verb becomes a noun, resulting in padipu, which means singing, as an activity or the act of singing. 2. Inflectional suffix. Now you can add an inflectional suffix to show pluralization or case. For example, padipagal. Padipa adds the plural inflection gal, changing the meaning to singings in multiple instances or types of singing. So, the structure evolves as follows. Root, padu, pad, to sing, with derivational suffix padapu, singing, with inflectional suffix gal, singings. This shows the same principle at work in Tamil, where derivational morphology shapes the word first, followed by inflectional changes to fit the grammatical context.
Now, can you demonstrate examples of a noun, undergoing the process of declension?
Sure. In Indian languages, declension is a process where nouns change their form to indicate grammatical categories such as case, number, and sometimes gender. Let me show you an example from two languages, Hindi and Tamil. In the example, the noun ladka, which means boy, undergoes declension to indicate case and number. 1. Nominative singular, subject, ladka, boy. 2. Nominative plural, ladke, boys. 3. Singular, used with postpositions, ladke, of the boy. 4. Oblique plural, ladkon, of the boys. 5. Vocative singular, ladke, o boy. 6. Plural, ladko, o boys. As you can see, the word ladka changes based on the case and number to fit its grammatical role in a sentence.
Gladka.
Tamil example, let's look at the Tamil noun maram, which means tree. Tamil uses case markers that are added to the noun stem to indicate different cases. 1. Nominative singular, subject, maram, tree. 2. Accusative, direct object, martai, the tree. 3. Dative, indirect object, abnaratku, to the tree. 4. Genitive, possessive, maratin, of the tree. 5. Locative, location, or maratil, in the tree. Here, the noun maram changes with suffixes to indicate different grammatical cases, showing how it undergoes declension in Tamil. These examples demonstrate how declension in both Hindi and Tamil modifies the noun to indicate various grammatical relationships.